SoundCartel.
In this first episode of Season 5, we look at the state of play for podcasting. And is 2021 the year you should start a podcast? What you should be considering and what's involved. From SoundCartel, I'm Nick Schildberger, and this is Podcasting Essentials. Welcome to episode 1 of Season 5. And I'm delighted to be joined by producer and co-host Nicole Goodman.
Hi, Nick. We're back again in the studio after lockdown. Geez, what a year last year was. Pretty crazy. But actually, in relation to podcasting, it was great. It was pandemic-proof.
Yes, not a year to remember in many ways, but a good one for audio, as you said. And in podcasting alone, there were nearly 900,000 new podcasts started in 2020.
Yeah, it's an incredible number on its face, Nick, but when you compare it to 2019, in which there were only 320,000 new podcasts, it's a stark difference.
Well, and to put it in perspective, it's about 17,000 new podcasts being launched every week last year, which equates to about one almost every 30 seconds.
Wow, it's hard to fathom. It's amazing.
A lot of which was probably brought on by people being home, having more time to create audio, perhaps different ways to share their wisdom with the world.
Yeah, that's right. And we see that in a lot of the podcasts being based around education. So for people that may have either lost their job or be teetering on the edge, the idea of what value can they bring to a listening audience was probably uppermost in their mind.
And a lot of those podcasts did only last 2 or 3 episodes. So it'll be interesting in 2021 which of those podcasts come back and continue on.
Yeah.
We're already seeing the early stats this year that new podcasts are doing more episodes, getting past 10 episodes, that sort of thing. So that's encouraging. But again, just reflecting on 2020, downloads were up, which is no surprise with so many more podcasts. I think now we're closing in on 2 million podcasts being out in the world. Ad revenue was up, despite a lot of brands curtailing their spending on marketing.
Well, we saw that switch. We saw brands decide to funnel their marketing budgets into a medium where people were conglomerating. So, yes, more podcasts were made in the year than ever before, but also more people were listening than ever before. There was a ready audience waiting to be entertained and who were changing their listening habits. So it was kind of a perfect storm.
Now, speaking of those listener habits and the precise numbers, Edison Research will be releasing their annual survey shortly. It's fairly safe to say, I think, both awareness and listenership is going to rocket up again.
Yeah.
But as soon as that's released, we'll bring it to you. Yes. And also when the Australian-specific numbers come out a little bit later in the year, we'll definitely be covering that on this podcast. We mentioned at the end of last year that Amazon joined podcasting, another huge player, and not dissimilarly to Spotify, they've opened their checkbook early on and have bought Wondery for about $300 million.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's great for the industry, obviously, to have these big players opening their checkbook, as you say, Nick, particularly for Wondery, who managed to produce such high-quality, high-rating podcasts, if that standard's going to be maintained. So kind of watch this space. And the other thing it does is really validate the space once again for brands that are maybe in two minds about podcasting. I mean, there is an incredible amount of marketing dollars going into this communications medium. So on that front, I wouldn't think twice too much.
We're all quite familiar with the streaming wars between Netflix and HBO and Disney Plus and Apple Plus and all of those. It'll be interesting to watch these big players now starting to sort of line up in podcasting. We're going to have Spotify, Apple, Amazon now, there's Audible, Stitcher. There's a few of them out there. It'll be interesting to see whether the paid side of things becomes a bigger thing in 2021.
Wouldn't it be interesting if Netflix came into the space? I mean, then you're really comparing apples with apples.
Yeah, well, I would love to see. I mean, there's already heaps of companion podcasts that discuss TV shows. Wouldn't it be cool if Netflix, for example, decided to create Perhaps for a show that's done a couple of seasons and hasn't quite hit the numbers to justify producing a third season, they could produce a podcast version of an existing TV show. Kind of reverse engineer what happened in podcasting over the last few years, where shows like Dirty John, they've gone from a podcast to TV. Perhaps it could go the other direction.
The other way, yeah.
And just to finish the review of 2020, it was a huge year for us at SoundCartel. After 3 decades, went through a very bold rebrand to SoundCartel. We also launched a daily business podcast, Business Essentials Daily, which has gone past 200 episodes, and you're the host of that, Nicole.
Look, it's so strange to hear you say that it all happened in 2020, Nick. It feels like it happened 5 years ago. This pandemic has kind of elasticized time. It's phenomenal. We really did accomplish a lot in 2020.
We did lots of bespoke work for clients, of course, as we do every year. A little bit different last year. Some demand for audio was brought on by the pandemic. We did more internal and private podcasts, some for pharmaceutical companies for their staff. We also did an internal podcast for Gymnastics Victoria for them to be able to speak to their clubs that were all closed during the lockdown. So again, it'll be interesting to see whether those organisations that dip their toe in the water with audio in 2020 will continue on using the medium 2021 and beyond.
Yeah.
So 2021, let's look at what brands should be considering. Should they be doing a podcast? What's involved? And I want to start with something that is a bit of a mantra for us at SoundCartel this year, and something that we also want to project onto our brands. It's the time to be bold.
Yeah.
Podcasting's been around for 15 plus years. Really didn't take off in a significant way until around 2014 with the likes of Serial, and we know the history there. I kind of feel like we're getting to that 7-year itch.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of great stuff being produced, and more great quality audio is being produced every year. But I really think now is the time to think outside the square and for brands to be bold.
Yeah, it really is the time to take the shackles off a little bit. I think what the pandemic has done, and we see this across other communications channels, is this desperate need for authenticity, for realness. And you see this with the rise of TikTok and these video streaming platforms. People want to connect. They want to feel like they're being listened to and heard and seen. And so it's an opportunity for brands, particularly if you've been in a more traditional space, to kind of let go a little bit, have a bit of fun and connect with an audience in a really intimate way, which audio provides.
We've seen a lot of creativity over the years, but a lot of it does come from overseas. For example, Oral-B and their Chompers podcast, where they created a short 2.5-minute story every morning and every night for kids to listen to while they brush their teeth. A fabulous idea. Something that can also be listened to on a smart speaker. And when they were creating that, smart speakers were still in their infancy. So that was something where they thought outside the box. They didn't just look at what their competitor was doing. They really thought, let's just be creative and come up with something new. And that's what I think brands and agencies need to be doing again now, not just looking at what's already been done or replicating another successful podcast, but starting from scratch, whether it be immersive, whether it be integrating more with the car or with a smart speaker, or just something completely new.
Yeah. And when we think about the fact that the number of podcasters doubled over the last year, it's actually likely to triple or quadruple as well. So it really is the fastest growing communications medium, with listeners growing exponentially too. And of course, for brands, the key ingredient is to be where your audience is. So podcasting is the obvious next move.
So, Nicole, it's not a question of should you start a podcast, it's what should you be creating?
That is exactly right, Nick.
So run me through the key reasons why a brand listening right now should be considering creating a podcast.
The idea is to be able to reach your current audience, but what that also does is present you to a brand new audience in an arena where they might not expect you to be. So it's that surprise and delight element where you're stepping out of a traditional construct of what your brand is seen as and allowing listeners to really see you and listen to you in a different way. Again, the intimacy of the medium, it really is an opportunity to develop a stronger relationship with your audience. It develops that element of trust where people can get to know you, hear from you personally, and build that loyalty piece. And of course, the costs involved in podcasting aren't as prohibitive as, say, TV, print or outdoor, even some digital campaigns. Brands also have an existing infrastructure to amplify their podcasts. So whilst, if it's not something you've done before, it might seem overwhelming, the amplification part of podcasting, which is 50% really of the process, brands already have that sewn up. You've got your own email databases, you've got your social media platforms set up, you've got an existing and established contact base, which for many people starting a new podcast is a huge challenge to build.
And then once you reach that audience via audio, we can see now that the consumption of podcasts is at levels that are sort of unheard of in most other forms of marketing. You can do a 30-minute podcast and get 80, 90+% completion rate or consumption of that audio. That's long-form storytelling and time to build that trust and loyalty. I've quoted it before, but Pacific Content released some stats that said for an equivalent length video, your consumption is going to be down at about 14%. That's a huge difference. Okay, so moving along now, Nicole, what's involved in creating a podcast?
I think a lot of brands, again, become stuck at this stage and feel maybe overwhelmed by the process. But I think what you need to do first off is understand the business case for your brand to start creating audio. Now, by audio, Nick, we mean not just podcasting, but is there a strategy for smart speakers or for in-car audio entertainment?
Experiential stuff at events, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And even down to things like your messages on hold. This is all about what your brand sounds like to your audience at every single touch point. The next step then is to really do an audit of how you're communicating at the moment. What are you saying across social media, email, website, all your different owned media and paid? How does podcasting fit into that? Support, supplement messaging perhaps. Podcasting is not going to be your single and sole form of revenue, nor should it be. It's all part of that 360-degree communication piece. It should always be part of the bigger comms pie.
And then let's narrow it down a little bit. We've come up with that overall strategy. We want to produce a podcast. Where do we start?
Well, we have to start with purpose and audience. So why are you producing this podcast and to whom are you talking? Obviously, you've done a lot of work already on who your audience is, and that can change slightly depending on where the comms medium is that you're using, but you largely have an idea of exactly who you're talking to. The purpose of the podcast is really unique. What are you wanting to get out of it, and why are you wanting to produce it?
Yeah, things like what does success look like? What's the return on investment? What's the whole point of doing it? And being able to narrow that down to one or two sentences so everybody is very clear on exactly why you're doing it.
That's right. And then once you know that, then you can start to flesh out things like the content, the tone, the style. And at this point, Nick, this is the opportunity to really be bold, be brave, and think outside the square. Step out of your comfort zone a little bit.
And now we haven't produced a single second of audio yet, but I'm going to say the next thing you should start doing is planning the marketing and distribution of your podcast from the very outset.
Yes, because as we said earlier, it really is 50% of the process of producing a podcast. So start as you mean to finish. It takes a long time to produce marketing content, as most brands would know, and you really want to have that strategy ready to go by the time production of the podcast is finished.
Yeah, and because an audience is not going to appear by magic.
Exactly.
And I think that's probably one of the things that we've seen over the years with some of the brands we've worked with. They've put so much attention into producing broadcast quality, beautiful audio. They haven't put as much attention into how they're going to tell their audience that they've actually produced it.
And then we move into the producing or the recording of the podcast, Nick, which is kind of the fun part of it where we get our hands dirty. And it's then about doing an internal audit. So do you have talent internally? Is your CEO a great communicator? Do you have people that can do fantastic research, write questions, write scripts?
And then you'll also need to look externally, most likely. If you're going to produce really high quality audio, you're probably going to need some expert advice from an agency that has those tens of thousands of hours of skill in producing audio.
Yeah, that's right. And look, that's what we're best at providing. But any audio agency can help you out in that area. The thing to remember is audio is a skill. And you've put a lot of years, a lot of resources, a lot of work in developing who you are, who your audience expects you to be. To go into podcasting and think you can do it either on the cheap or at a lower production level is not really going to be a great reflection on the brand.
I like to use the analogy, it's unlikely that a large brand is going to get the intern to shoot a TVC on an iPhone.
Yes.
So similarly, why would you get someone who doesn't have experience in the technical side of editing and mixing and mastering and EQing and all that with audio if you want it to be at that same quality that you produce all of your other communication? It comes back to respecting your audience and giving them what they would expect from you.
Correct. And again, while there is often a perception that there is a low barrier to entry in podcasting, it is still a specialised medium and there is no expectation that brands should understand or have the skills to produce high-quality audio. That's why you get to either leave everything up to the outsourced agency or provide your scripts or your talent, and then the rest of the weight is taken off your shoulders and it's left up to the experts.
But working in collaboration is particularly how we like to work, and one of the reasons why we rebranded to SoundCartel is because we're a close-knit group of experts, but we like to have people come into our family, so to speak, when we produce audio with clients. It's leveraging the very best that they've got to offer, mixing it with what we've got, and at the end you get
magic.
Exactly.
Audio magic.
So to that point, you've worked out what you're going to produce, how you're going to produce it, who's going to produce it. You just go away and do it. It's simple.
Simple.
And I don't want to delve into every step of the process in great detail. We will dive into different parts of the process throughout this season of Podcasting Essentials. But just as an overview, I guess the 5 steps that we would take a client on to produce audio from the point we're at now is the first step is pre-production. That's all your content planning. It's the briefs and the scripting. If you spend the time on doing the pre-production well, it makes the recording process much, much easier. And when it comes to recording, which is the next step, we prefer, like we are now, to be in a studio. Once it's all recorded, the next step is the post-production. And that's where our sound engineers make their money. It's their time to shine. That's where all the editing, the cleaning of the audio, the mixing, the mastering, sound design, music, it all comes together in the mixing pot. Noise reduction if required because of remote recording. Perhaps there's location recordings. It can all be mixed together and you end up with this beautifully created MP3 file. Just a little thing, but it can be magical. And the last 2 steps are the distribution, and that's actually the easy part. That's getting it out onto the networks and the platforms like Apple and Spotify, Amazon now, of course.
Yes.
And then the last and very important step is that marketing and amplification, which we've touched on a few times in this episode. That's where you need to grow that audience. And there's lots and lots we can discuss on that topic alone. And we're going to focus on that quite a bit this season, actually, because things around SEO, podcast-specific marketing activities that have been proven to work well are all areas that we want to discuss with other experts that are doing it all around the world.
That's right. And in fact, just listening to that list, Nick, the last thing you'd want to do is get right to that amplification point, put everything up on all the apps and realise we haven't done any marketing preparation. Nightmare.
And you're going to struggle to get that return on investment that you will have thought about right back at the strategy stage if you haven't got that last step in place.
Exactly.
And above all, it is a fun process. And I think if you have fun doing it, it reflects in the quality and enjoyment that your listeners are going to have when they listen to the audio.
Yeah, it's a fun process. It's a fun medium. There are rules and guidelines for all sorts of comms, but podcasting in particular is really fun. There's a bit more freedom in podcasting. People get to be themselves a little bit more. Yeah, don't forget to have fun while you're doing it.
Yeah, it's a young and vibrant medium. People are still exploring it. And above all, I'll say it one last time, be bold.
Be bold, be brave.
Well, that's it for this first episode of Season 5 of Podcasting Essentials. Thanks, Nicole, for kicking off the year with me again.
Oh, it's great to be back in the chair again, Nick. And look, we'd love to hear from you, the listener, about what topics you'd like us to cover this year.
Yes, very much so. We would love to hear your thoughts. And you can do so by heading to our website at soundcartel.com.au or our socials at SoundCartelAU and drop us a line with your ideas. Or, of course, if you'd like to discuss how we can help you produce a podcast.
And during these crazy times, if you are after business insights and inspiration each morning, you can check out our daily podcast, Business Essentials Daily, hosted by me, wherever you're listening now.
That's it, Nick. Keep getting the word out. And from the team at SoundCartel, thanks so much for listening.
SoundCartel.